We'll start off with a prayer. Lord, we take this time to learn more to how to guide these churches, these people through this unique time in our history. Guide us, protect us. Our loved ones everywhere. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Unfortunately, Karen could not get on, so I got stuck doing the prayer today. Jack is in the midst of working with the jurisdictional national group of all the Methodist foundations. So that's why both are not here, and they both have passed on their well wishes for the program today too. So Roland, people have heard you before, but I'm asking you today, what interesting thing do people not know about you?
Well, I don't know if I shared this the last time that one of the things that I enjoy doing is brewing my own beer. I guess that's okay to say in this setting.
Okay. Okay, good. And what types of beer do you do?
English IPAs, brown ales, and stouts.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, great. Well, without further ado, I want to welcome Roland. Annabelle, thank you for helping. She'll be collecting the questions throughout. And Roland, it is all yours.
Will I see the chat box when it goes when I ask people to put?
You should be able to see it too. Yeah. If not, just let us know, and Annabelle and I can also see it.
Okay. All right. Great. I am going to share my screen and say good morning to everyone. I'm glad to be with you again. The time that we are engaging in right now is fraught with challenges for us as individuals, as well as for leaders. So I trust that you can see my screen.
Yep. And it is being taped. Everybody, you are being taped for future use. So.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So let me see if I'm going to be able to advance my screen as I want. Yep, there we go. So here we are. Something has happened. My title screen, by the way, says Dealing with Resistance in a Disruptive World. And in fact, that is exactly what all of us are doing. The world has been disrupted. So what are we to do? Your leadership has been disrupted. So what to do? You have been disrupted. So what to do? A key question is, in what way or ways is resistance showing up in you and in others in response to the disruption that's been caused by the corona pandemic? At this time, there are more than 93,000, I checked that number this morning, 93,000 deaths from the coronavirus pandemic. Nearly everything in your lives has been disrupted. Your congregation cannot gather as it's accustomed to doing. New words have been added to our everyday life. I just heard Frank mentioning PPP. Which is something that you probably would not have known about or thought about or even needed, certainly, except for this disruption. Other new words that have been added to our lexicon: social distancing. Who knew what that was before COVID-19? PPE, personal protective equipment. Things like N95 respirators and masks, protective clothing, helmets, goggles, etc. This quote that you see on the screen is adapted from the original that's attributed to Confucius. And it's instructive for us all. As the water shapes itself to the vessel that contains it, so a wise leader adapts to circumstances. The water is powerless to resist the shape of the vessel. It has to conform to the shape of the vessel. Some leaders may choose to try to to resist the disruption of the coronavirus. The wise and effective leader, however, adapts and figures out what's the next best thing to do. What's the next best thing to do to adjust and help others adjust to the impact of this disruption. Let's go back and take a look at some of the things that I talked with many of you about back in November about resistance. Look at these definitions of resistance. Many of the presumed definitions are negative, but take a look at the ones that are in red and consider how they might be reframed to reveal a positive perspective for what resistance reveals. The first one says, a creative force for managing a difficult world. How can we use it? How can we use resistance to help us manage this difficult world that we are now in? The second one says it's a reaction to a changing boundary. Notice the things about which you and others have the most angst. That's the place, that's a possible place to start to reframe the best that can come from the change that we are undoubtedly having to deal with. Here are a few more to consider that I have shown earlier. Again, in red, a healthy self-regulating manifestation that must be respected. And for sure, resistance is a natural part of any change process. And that's an important thing to remember. It is a natural part of any change process. And here is an example of a change process where you see resistance. The old status quo is no more. It has been disrupted by the COVID-19, that foreign element that has come upon us all. And our initial response to it is resistance. And then you notice that the change process has us falling into chaos, ultimately fumbling about there at the bottom of the curve, eventually transforming, getting an idea as to what we can do to move forward, beginning to move forward, ultimately integrating ideas that take us to a new status quo. That is the normal, the natural change process. We all go through it. We go through this kind of change process, no matter if the change is self-initiated or it's imposed from the outside. It may be somewhat chaotic if the change is self-initiated, but nonetheless, it's typical. And in the world that we inhabit today, the challenge that leaders face is that change is the only constant and it just keeps coming. This path that you see is one that's followed in some way by everyone who is impacted by change, the leaders and the followers alike. So here's a question for you. Two questions, actually. I want you to respond to the first question first. What are some of the changes that you have been required to make in your congregational life? Can you type some of that into the chat box so we can see what we're all dealing with?
Roland, you can see the chat box now? Are you good?
No, I cannot see the chat box. And if I can't see it, that's maybe you can.
It should be at the bottom of your screen, maybe. Okay.
No, it's not there. That's okay. If someone can just read off some of the responses.
Go ahead, Annabelle.
Sure. So worshiping online, not worshiping in the sanctuary online, no visitation to hospitals or even homes, shift to online worship and online giving, online meetings and Bible study. Someone says ministering in 2 centuries, online and through phone calls and letters. Increased mission opportunities.
Okay, so a number of things that have affected you. A lot of online worship, online meetings. Significantly, one of the things that pastors and others in the congregation are accustomed to doing is visiting people who may be homebound or who may be in nursing homes or in the hospital, but no visits. Going back to the old ways of ministry, writing letters to people in some instances. I mean, when was the last time that was done in your life or in your congregation? And certainly increased opportunities for ministry. So my second question is, what kind of responses have you gotten from people who were impacted by the change? How have people communicated or talked with you or indicated to you what's happening with them as it relates to the change? Put some of those responses, if you would, in the chat box.
Someone says responding to more mental health crisis with anxiety.
Okay.
Some are refusing to join online even though they may, or they have the capability.
Uh-huh.
Many are remarkably understanding and eager to help. People willing to do some things they didn't want to try before. A wonderful response to a food mission outreach. Decreased giving.
Decreased giving.
Decreased in this case.
Uh-huh.
Increased sense of community. A few people have become reclusive. The sick and shut-ins are having worship online, so they're feeling part of the church. Increased online giving.
Okay.
More community engagement with ministry, more adaptive to the changes, people trying online giving, helping with food ministry.
Great.
One person says children are desperate for connection.
Yeah.
And everyone is developing COVID brain.
Yeah, I think a lot of us can relate to that. Wonderful. Anxiety obviously is one of the things that often occurs in response to change, and refusal to even get engaged with the change often occurs as well. These are some of the things that show up as resistance, and you've seen this list before. What I heard in your responses is quite encouraging, I must say, because if people are eager to help more and interested in getting involved with the online worship and online meetings and so forth, that's a good thing. But what often happens are some of the things that you see on this slide, and they may not actually show up, and yet they may be things that people are experiencing. Confusion, denial, deflection, silence. Maybe you're not hearing from some people. Maybe some of the changes that you are attempting to do to reframe the disruption in order to glean the positive change that you would like to see may cause some of these behaviors to show up. And they are to be expected. They are to be expected because, again, that is what resistance often looks like. And some of these default positions that are often taken in response to resistance may show up as well. They may show up in your response to the perceived resistance. They may show up in the response of some of your staff leaders, your other leaders in your congregation, as people show signs of resistance. These default positions, using power, ignoring the resistance, trying to reason with people and trying to get them to just simply accept because you overload them with facts and applying the force of reason. These default positions most often don't work because the fact of the matter is they tend to increase resistance, or if you do win, it may not be worth the cost. Again, these are points that I talked about when we met back in November, and you are clearly in a situation where you're likely to be facing some of this right now. The other thing about these default positions is that they have the effect of failing to create synergy. And synergy is something that is very much needed in your organization, in your congregation now. The default positions, in fact, often create fear and suspicion and tend to drive people away, drive people apart. So again, I asked the question with all of the disruption, what to do. Number one, anticipate that there's going to be resistance to change efforts. There's going to be resistance as you and others seek to figure out new ways of doing ministry, new ways of engaging with your congregation. And with greater awareness, if you help people to understand that they have more choice, which means that they have more control over what happens, getting information out to them, helping them and helping you help them to determine the impact of the change, who's going to be affected, how and to what degree. These are important ways to deal with the resistance that you may be experiencing within yourself as well as in others. Getting a clearer picture of the amount of energy that people have in support of the change, whatever the change is that's being suggested, will assist you in knowing where the hot spots are. So you want to talk with people, you want to communicate and hear from people what they're experiencing, what their reaction is to the change. That's going to help you to figure out, excuse me, to help you to figure out where you need to place your greatest effort and emphasis on helping people adapt to the change. Undoubtedly, you have experienced both the change process and resistance before. This is not new. It's just a different stimuli, if you will, that has brought about the resistance. So you've experienced this before. Think about what has worked in the past. Think about what has not worked in the past. Identify the successes and the missteps in previous efforts and use them to replicate the helpful actions that you may have taken in the past so that you can avoid the pitfalls. It is important to develop strategies for building commitment. And I would say, as I believe I may have said in the past, as you help people think about the positives and the negatives, the gain and growth opportunities as well as potential losses, help people to kind of think through both of those, using the points of mutual gain and potential losses as a way to raise awareness of the fact that there is give and take, there are pluses and minuses, and a constant flow of information will help that. And I can't really emphasize enough how important it is to communicate with people and to engage people in the and thinking about the kinds of changes that are required in response to this disruption that we are facing. Most important, take the resistance seriously. Often the resistance is telling a leader something about the change that may not be so readily apparent. And it is always, I think, in the leader's best interest to embrace the resistance and to try and find out what it is that he or she may be missing. So take it seriously. It may be something, it may be signaling something about which you really need to know in order to help yourself and to help others to move forward. What you say and what you do matters. And it matters even when you are not aware that people are noticing what you say and what you do. So it's important to monitor your own internal reactions, pay attention to other people's nonverbal cues, identify the form of resistance that you may be seeing in them, and talk about it. Try to name what it is that you see in some neutral way so that it doesn't raise the automatic defenses that come up sometimes when people are confronted with what it is that you see in their behavior. And share your own feelings. Describe what's happening for you. Let people know that they are not alone. They are not the only ones who are feeling the impact of this disruption, that you too have feelings about what's going on, and it's important for you to share that with them. Now, the last time we were together, I showed you a model, which I'm going to come back to, the model that I showed on, and I think I may have sent it to you after our session, but it is a model for dealing with transition. I want to show, excuse me, I want to introduce a new model to you this morning, which is one that takes a look at the 5 domains of human social experience. The model is called the SCARF model. Some of you may be familiar with it. David Rock, who is a psychologist, introduced this model in 2008. And it's a model that takes a look at what's going on in the brain. It incorporates brain science into an understanding of leadership. Rock and his colleagues have created a Neuro Leadership Institute. You see a URL at the bottom of the screen here, which if you go to that URL, will take you to a website where you can do an assessment for yourself that would help you to get a sense of an understanding of how this model shows up for you. I want to talk about it just briefly. I'm not trying to teach the model. I do want you to, I do encourage you, in fact, to go to the website and do the assessment. It's an easy, quick self-assessment that will help you to get some indicators as to how important these domains are for you. Status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. So inasmuch as the church is, among other things, a social institution, we're all engaged in a great social experiment or experience through the many activities that go on normally when we're not disrupted as we are right now by COVID. The social activities that go on within the congregation. Worship is a social activity. Traditional worship, contemporary worship, or other forms of worship is a social activity. Sunday school, Bible study, choir, handbell choir. My wife and I play in a handbell choir in our small church, which we've not been able to do for the last 3 months because of the COVID. Funerals, weddings, committee meetings of all kinds, preschool. All of these are social activities that go on in the congregation that we're unable to do right now. Because we're not able to do them, the SCARF model is a way of taking a look at what's going on for us as individuals. This model is truly used to help you take a look at what's happening for you. It's a brain-based model that helps you to figure out how you are being impacted, and with that awareness, what you can do to collaborate and influence others. When you go to the website, you will see the model shows up like this. It's a model of social threats and rewards: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And it shows that when one or more of these 5 domains is stimulated in the brain, the response is to move away if there is a perceived threat, or to move toward if there is some type of reward that's indicated. Now, notice the size of the arrow to the left. When it's a threat, it's big, and we want to get out of the way. We want to get away from that threat. All of the social activities that I mentioned on the previous slide are important to each of us in a particular way. And any change in any of those may represent a threat. And if it does, we resist and try to move away. For example, a perceived threat to one's status activates a similar brain network as a threat to one's life. So much of what we do, so much of how we identify ourselves is wrapped up in what we do. And if that is threatened, it's very much like a threat to our life. And the tendency is to move away quickly from that threat. In the same way that a perceived increase in fairness activates the same reward circuitry in the brain as receiving a monetary reward, even if it's a small reward. So the model helps us to understand a little bit about what's going on in our brain when any of these 5 domains is stimulated by activities outside of ourselves. So that's the SCARF model, and I do encourage you to use the URL. I believe you will get these slides, and when you do, you will see that there are note pages at the bottom of the slides, and that URL is also printed there, so you can use either the slide itself or copy and paste the URL into your browser to get to the assessment.
Roland, we'll have the slides for him. Yep.
Great, great. Okay, so this is the model that I talked about that I showed you back in November. I think I may have sent it to you subsequent to our meeting. It's William Bridges' model that indicates how people react to change, and it's a model that's useful in helping people handle resistance to change. If you notice, change begins with an ending. There's a neutral zone and new beginnings. Those are the 3 stages in this model. And what is certain in change is that something is ending. This model shows that. At the same time, something is beginning. Notice at the bottom left, the little yellow slice is the start of something new. And it happens at about the same time that something else is ending. Likewise, the uncertainty begins at the same time that something is ending. And that zone of uncertainty is referred to as the neutral zone. Some of you may be familiar with this model, or you may recall it from me having shown it to you earlier. I want to give you an opportunity to look at it a different way. Here we see the ending, the neutral zone, and new beginning, but we also see what's going on in people as the words that are shown here on the slide indicate. Denial, shock, anger, frustration. And ultimately that takes people down, 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 and they may end up in a place where they say, okay, now what am I to do? That zone of uncertainty referred to by Bridges as a neutral zone is the place where things are a little bit foggy and try to figure out what is it that we can do. And then we move from there into some degree of skepticism, ultimately accepting the fact that the change is happening, how important it is. We develop a sense of hope about arriving at a new place as we move along with this transition, and ultimately, hopefully, get to a place of enthusiasm about the new beginning. Notice, change is fast. We go down very quickly. Transition is slow. We come back up from that neutral zone a little more slowly. Change is the event, the new direction that's intended to change the culture. This model describes the psychological impact, the transition, if you will, that people go through in attempting to adapt to the change. In the end, all things change, and in order for change to take place, something must come to an end. And as you attempt to lead others through the change, it's important for you to acknowledge that they and you may feel a sense of loss, something that you loved or something that you enjoyed doing, maybe a working relationship that you had with others. All of that's ending. And for some people, that may be quite okay, and they're ready to move on with you to a new beginning. But what's important at this stage is to acknowledge what's lost or gone. Acknowledge what's lost or gone. And Bridges actually talks about celebrating the endings in some formal way, in some, well, formal is perhaps not the best word to use, but to be particularly intentional about celebrating the ending. What it was that you enjoyed that you now know you're no longer going to be able to have. And then very often as we go through this psychological transition that accompanies change, it's important to understand that just as much as the situational or operational shifts are occurring, this first transitional phase is an important one to be aware of as you interpret what's happening to you and around you. From an organizational perspective, other people are looking to you and looking at you for direction and guidance. So it's important to ask yourself as a leader, how am I responding to this situation? How is my staff or member of a congregation responding? How much of that response is emotional? And what are the facts that are associated with why this change is occurring? And how can I communicate those facts to others? And it's important to communicate. Can't say that often enough. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Let's talk a little bit about the neutral zone. Many managers and leaders know instinctively that people want certainty. Go back to the SCARF model. The second element in the SCARF model is the element of certainty. People want certainty. It's the second stage here in the transition model. It's the neutral zone. It's characterized by uncertainty. And as a leader, it's worth recognizing the fluctuating emotions and the sense of dislocation that a major change has on you as well as on others. So pay attention to any sense of dislocation that you may feel and that you sense in others. There's likely to be a sense of disorientation because the normal equilibrium has been upended and people need to find a new sense of balance. You need to find a new sense of balance. So the upside of the neutral zone is there is tremendous opportunity here to create new ways of thinking and acting. Some of the things that you described, if I could go back to the notes that I made that are going on in your congregations, indicate that you are indeed looking at opportunities to create new ways of acting and behaving and engaging with each other. So the neutral zone is a tremendous place to do all of that, to get other people involved. By the by, you don't have to come up with all the new ideas. So tap into the resources that are available to you in the membership in your congregation and let them help to generate some of the new ideas. The important thing to keep in mind here is that the community has this time to explore together what it means to be moving along this particular journey. From an organizational perspective, as the leader, key questions to ask yourself: how capable am I of acting decisively while being uncertain? And then it's important to keep in mind that the leader does have to show a sense of decisiveness, even in times of uncertainty. How capable am I of acting decisively while being uncertain? And oh, by the way, it's quite okay for the leader to say, you know, I'm not sure. I don't know. What do you think? And that's a great way to engage and involve others in the process of figuring out what's going to be the way forward, the best way forward. Another thing to ask yourself is, how can we use this opportunity to come together as a chance to think and act differently? And how can I help my staff and members and myself see opportunity in the midst of this disruptive change that we are experiencing? As we talk about the new beginnings, Some people are ready right away. Other people take longer to get there, but eventually they do get there. People deal with change differently and at a different pace. It can take a long time for this stage to be reached when a major organizational or cultural change occurs. And in some of your congregations, it may feel like it's been forever to enable you to begin to figure out ways to adapt to a new beginning for yourself and for others. To reach this stage of new beginning, leaders have to know how to guide themselves and others through the ending, celebrating endings appropriately, through the neutral zone, taking time to explore some new ways of thinking and doing, and ultimately to get to a place of new beginning. Doing this together will maximize the alignment and the commitment to embracing change as a group, rather than having people muddle through on their own. And as leaders, it's important to be aware of and to be sensitive to the different stages that people are at, because all people adapt to change at a different pace. Some may be lingering back in the ending, some may be still wandering around in the neutral zone. Hopefully the majority have already moved with you to the place of new beginning. But as a leader, for you as in an organizational way, think about on any given day, where are my people at? How impatient am I to have everyone accept things and move on? That impatience, by the way, can be a sign that you need to pay attention to for yourself, so that you aren't pushing people too quickly to a place where they're not ready to go. Another thing to ask yourself is, when did I last talk with my staff and members about their response to change? And what else do I need to do to help us all adapt to the new beginning? Remember I said change is fast and transition is slow. So considering this discussion, I guess I would ask you to think about where you are on the Bridges model of transition and why you see yourself there. You don't have to answer the question in the chat, but just kind of ponder that. Where are you? Ending, neutral zone, new beginning, somewhere on that change map. And the questions related to each of those elements on the transition model, the questions to use to help you think about them is, what's ending for you? What do you want to hold on to? And you don't have to let go of everything. There may be some things that you decide just can't let that go, don't want to let that go, but there are some other things that are definitely ending for me. Be real clear with yourself about what they are. In the neutral zone, what are you willing to try differently? What are you willing to try differently? And lastly, what will the new beginning look like for you? I encourage you to use what you learn about yourself from doing the SCARF assessment to help you answer those questions, to help you see yourself in the transition that Bridges talks about in his model. So use these two models together to help you figure out what's going on for you, and to perhaps even have some conversation with others about what may be going on for them. And certainly feel free to share the link to that assessment with others in your congregation, and certainly among your leadership staff. Change is fast, transition is slow, and we all have to recognize that and ultimately get there. So here are some final thoughts. There will be resistance to change. It's inevitable, but not impossible to overcome. Understanding oneself and how resistance shows up in you will give you some clues as to how to notice and name the resistance that you see in others. And remember to step into the resistance. You may just learn something about the person who is resisting, and also about the change that you are attempting that is not readily observable. I want to just say one more thing before I stop sharing my screen, and that is, take this opportunity to disrupt your role, to redefine your role as a leader of leaders who helps others to take on some of the responsibilities that are required to ensure the agility and the stability of your congregation. Since ministry must now be done differently. As a leader, it's important for you to help shape the future, not just to accept the present. So this is an opportunity to engage others in reflecting on what is truly required to achieve success in this disruptive environment that we are in. We're all experiencing it. Most importantly, it's incumbent upon us all to not just accept the traditional sense that we have to continue to do things the way we've always done because we are the pastor and leader of the flock. There are leaders within your congregations, as I'm sure you are all aware and have already identified and begun to embrace, who can help you and help the entire congregation through this disruptive change. That's it. Let's see if I can stop my share. Yeah, okay, there we are.
All right, we'll ask people to share their comments in chat and Q&A. I know there's one or two already. Annabelle. I just want to say also, Roland, that reminds me so much of the athlete, the scarf model. You know, it hurts more losing than it wins when, you know, feels good winning. That's always the balance you're trying to figure out. So I thought that was a good model to see. You know, once again, I'm very visual, so good. Annabelle?
So this is more of a comment than a question, but perhaps you could speak to this, Roland. It says, this resistance seems different because this virus is an outside force and was not based on a choice or a decision by a leader.
Nonetheless, yes, that is true. Nonetheless, the leader in the organization, each of you as pastors in your churches, have to help people to adapt to that change. It was imposed, and it's not something that any of us wished for. Certainly not initiated by you as a leader in your congregation. But we have to adapt to it, and that's kind of what our entire society is dealing with right now. And the models that I have shared here, both the SCARF model and Bridges transition model, are useful in enabling us to kind of step back and figure out, despite the fact that we had nothing to do with this thing that is now upon us, we have to deal with it. So that's the best way I can respond to that question or comment.
Great.
I don't see any other questions right now. You were very clear, apparently, Roland.
So Roland, on the
Anybody else have any
handbells,
thoughts?
there's some opportunities for you to get that handbell choir back. So I'd encourage you to, I challenge you to get that back. So there's some ways you can do it from different houses and things too.
Actually, you know, the bells are all at the church. You'd have to go to the church, get the bells, distribute them to which can be done. I'm not telling you why.
All right, I'm just challenging you. You can give me excuses, but I'm challenging you to put it back together. So I know that there's ways to do it.
There are, and I've seen some very
creative.
I've seen some very creative examples of choirs on Zoom and all that stuff. So people are figuring out ways to deal with this. And I have seen different ways of worship. Regrettably, the church that my wife and I attend is a small church, very small church, and doesn't have a lot of technology capability. So we've been completely separated. However, the church that we attended prior to our move to our new home is doing services on Sunday morning, so we can tap into that one readily. And I have seen other examples. In fact, I have visited the online services from a couple of the churches that are represented by you folks, and seen how you're doing what you're doing. So I know it's happening.
Annabelle?
We got nothing else.
Okay. Great. I want to thank everybody for coming in. And there are some comments coming in also in the chat. Also, Roland, you get to see those too. But just want to thank everybody for attending today. This is we still have several other webinars we have before September. We will keep you alerted to those, and I hope they're very helpful. They'll be posted online. Let us know if there's anything that you want in between resource-wise, the Training Tuesdays, other things too. We'll have the PowerPoints on there too, which you can utilize. You don't have to watch this whole program to get to the PowerPoint. So we'll have that available for you too. And that's about it for me.
Yeah,
Roland?
as I mentioned, the PowerPoints for this presentation, you will have the notes pages that I use, and so they may remind you of some of the things that I've talked about. Delighted to have been with you, and I appreciate having the opportunity to join with you again. Look forward to being face-to-face as soon as we can be.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Roland.
Bye-bye.
God bless.